Rain pounded down Lexington Avenue like a flurry of drums struck the pothole-filled pavement. Streetlights flickered, their glow reflecting through the dust-streaked windows of an old diner called Lexington Diner, where Sarah Carter, a black waitress in her 30s, was closing up after a grueling 12-hour Monday shift. Her sweat hadn't even dried from the endless table runs, yet she was still wiping down every worn-out wooden chair with odd care, as if it was the last shred of dignity she had left to protect. Suddenly, through the foggy windowpane, Sarah's gaze froze. Beneath the dim light of a dying neon sign, a small boy sat hunched over in a wheelchair. His hair was matted from the rain, his torn coat barely keeping out the wind, and his hands clutched a tattered blanket, shivering miserably. No one walked by. No adults nearby. Only Sarah, her breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with those lost, frightened blue eyes. Without thinking, she put down the rag and pushed open the door. Cold wind burst into the diner, slapping her face, but she paid it no mind. "Hey, sweetie, what are you doing out here all alone?" She knelt, speaking gently, as if to her nephew. The boy stammered. I'm waiting for my dad. He said he'd come back." His voice trembled, so soft the sound of rain nearly swallowed it. Sarah looked around. No one. No headlights, no hurried footsteps. Just darkness, rain, and abandonment. "I can't leave you out here. Come inside with me, okay? It's warmer, and I've got a special treat I save for nights just like this." The boy hesitated, then nodded faintly. Sarah didn't wait. She gently wheeled him inside. The door closed behind them, shutting out the rain, and leaving outside the silhouette of a black Bentley, silently parked across the street. Evan Wallace, a powerful and cold-hearted tech billionaire, was watching inside the car. His steely gray eyes didn't leave the image of the unfamiliar woman, carefully draping a towel over his son's shoulders and smiling at him, as if the world still had kindness. Sarah placed the boy, Daniel, near the heater. She went into the kitchen, preparing a grilled cheese sandwich with tomato soup, the same meal her grandmother used to make when the nights grew too long and too cold. "What's your name?" "Daniel." "That's a nice name. This dish is for special people only." Daniel devoured the food, his eyes lighting up like a child tasting a proper meal for the first time. Sarah didn't ask anything else. She just sat there, gently drying his wet hair, her gaze soft and calm. She didn't know. Across the street, a man was watching her not with gratitude, but with calculation. In Evan's world, no kindness comes for free. Everything, even compassion, has a price. And tonight, Sarah Carter had unknowingly placed a debt that Evan Wallace could not ignore. Inside the sleek black Bentley parked in the shadow of a tree across the street, Evan Wallace sat silently, his hands clasped on his lap. His icy gray eyes were fixed through the rain-streaked window, observing every movement inside that tiny diner. The rain continued to batter the car's glass, forming twisted streams like quiet slashes across the surface. He saw it all. The way Sarah knelt beside his son, draped a towel over the boy's shoulders, and smiled despite the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of smile given for tips. People reserved the kind of smile for someone they genuinely cared about. Evan's jaw clenched slightly. He wasn't used to unconditional kindness. He didn't believe in it. His world was built on payrolls, binding contracts, and mutually beneficial deals. In that world, everyone had a price. Every action came with a cost, and the idea of a stranger feeding his son, drying his hair, and sitting beside him without expecting anything in return didn't fit that equation. "What does she want?" Evan muttered, but deep down, he already knew. Sarah wanted nothing at all, and that was what made her dangerous. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Nora." His voice was low, clipped, emotionless. "Yes, sir. Lexington Diner. No dress, no heels. You have 20 minutes. Sir, I don't quite understand. Find out everything about the waitress who just fed my son. He hung up. Evan leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving the diner window. Daniel was eating like it was the best meal of his life. And Sarah was still there, unaware that her life had just been marked. Not because she asked for anything, but because she had shown too much kindness in a world that no longer believed in it. Moments later, the diner's door opened. A woman walked in. Blonde hair, hoodie, unremarkable attire. But her eyes were sharp, cold, and precise, like blades used to carve through steel. Evan sat upright. His plan was in motion. And Sarah Carter, the woman who had reached out on a rainy night to help a stranger's child, had just stepped into the heart of a world where every action and every word was dissected beneath the microscope of power. The soft chime of the diner's doorbell rang just as Sarah looked up from the kitchen. A blonde woman in a baseball cap stepped in, her hoodie damp from the rain, her eyes scanning the space as if calculating every detail. She didn't sit down, didn't glance at the menu. Her eyes fixed on one spot, where Daniel sat, a few crumbs of grilled cheese still clinging to his chin. The woman walked over, crouched down to Daniel's level, and offered a faint, detached smile. "Hey, kiddo, time to go." Daniel looked up, blinking. "But I haven't finished my milk." "You can take it with you." "Your dad's waiting," she said, her voice artificially sweet. Sarah stepped forward from behind the counter with a dish towel still in her hand. "Excuse me, and you are?" The woman stood up, her smile still in place, but her eyes growing sharper. "I'm his aunt." Sarah didn't flinch. She turned gently to Daniel. "Is that right, sweetie? Is this your aunt?" Daniel glanced at the woman, then at Sarah. A moment's hesitation, just a beat, but enough for Sarah to hear the siren in her mind wail. Something's not right. She knelt beside him, her voice calm. "Do you want to go with her?" Daniel stayed silent for a long while. Then he nodded, barely. "She came to get me. Dad asked her to." Sarah noticed his tiny hands clenching the tattered blanket, his eyes avoiding hers. That look, she'd seen it 100 times, in abandoned children, in herself as a little girl waiting in a damp apartment for a mother who never came home. Sarah knew, if she stopped them, if she questioned too much, she, a black woman in a rundown diner in the middle of the night, would be seen as the one causing trouble, overreacting, or worse, a threat. And Sarah also knew. There are battles where, when you lose, it's not because you were wrong, but because the world isn't on your side. So, she didn't stop them. She quietly turned back to the kitchen, grabbed a chocolate chip cookie, wrapped it neatly in wax paper, then returned and placed it in Daniel's hand. "This is for later, when you get home. Promise you'll save it." Daniel looked up at her, lips curling into a small, sincere smile. "You're the nicest person I've ever met." Sarah smiled back, but her heart tightened. She stood there, watching the strange woman wheel Daniel out of the diner, leaving behind the warm scent of chocolate, the chill of rainwater, and the heavy helplessness Sarah knew all too well. But when the woman turned back and gave her a look as sharp as a blade, Sarah knew with certainty. This wasn't a random encounter. Across the street, the Bentley was still parked. Its headlights flashed once. Someone was still watching. And this was only the beginning. It was late at night. The rain had stopped long ago, but inside Sarah, what continued to fall was a quiet, persistent unease, like the rain streaks still clinging to the window pane. Her small apartment on Fayette Street was dead silent. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, her feet still damp from the cheap canvas shoes she hadn't yet taken off. Elbows resting on her knees, head bowed, Her mind swirled with the image of Daniel's last glance, and the steel-cold eyes of the woman who had claimed to be his aunt. A knock echoed through the room. 3 knocks, firm, deliberate. Sarah startled. No one came to her door this late. No one knew this address, except the utility companies and a few debt collectors. She crept toward the door, eye pressed to the peephole, and her heart skipped a beat. A man, tall, wearing a black wool coat with the collar turned up, salt and pepper hair, neatly combed, a face carved from ice. He didn't knock again, just stood there, his gaze calm but penetrating. Sarah didn't open the door. "Who is it?" "Evan." His voice was deep, steady. "Daniel's father." A pause. Sarah gripped the door handle tighter. 100 questions raced through her. Why is he here? How did he find my address? And why? Doesn't he look the least bit afraid to knock on a stranger's door at midnight? "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp. A breath. "To settle a debt," Evan replied, still cold, still unwavering. Sarah bit her lip. Slowly, she cracked the door open, just enough to see his face clearly. Sharp, composed, powerful. "I don't want anything from you." "I know," Evan said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I have a principle. I don't believe in kindness. I believe in debt. And last night, you made me owe one." Sarah frowned, but before she could speak, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on the worn wooden table just inside the doorway. "This is an offer," he said, stepping back. "A job. Holt Dynamics. 6 figures. You'd work directly with me." Sarah looked at the envelope, then back at him, as if he'd stepped out of another world, a world she had never imagined herself touching. But instead of awe, she squinted at him. "You think I'll thank you and bow because of a fat envelope?" Evan didn't move. "Number, I think you'll consider it, because you're not someone who's easily bought. And that's exactly why I need you." Sarah was silent, and in that moment she saw something behind Evan's frosty gaze. Not guilt, not gratitude, but acknowledgement. At last, she bent down and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, thick paper. Inside was a real contract, a real position, not a handout. "I'll think about it." Evan gave a slight nod. "Don't think too long." Then he turned and left her alone in the dim room, clutching a gift she wasn't sure was grace or a trap. Sarah stood still for a long while, and inside her, one thing was crystal clear. She wasn't just going to think about it. She would take it, not for the money, but because, for the first time, she had seen a crack in their world, and she would step into it with her soaked shoes. The next morning, Sarah stood before the Holt Dynamics building, a towering glass and steel structure rising from the city center, like a cold monument to power and wealth. She wore an old blazer she'd bought from a thrift store and scuffed high heels. Amid the rush of sleek suits and polished shoes, Sarah was a quiet note, but ready to rise. "They'll look at you like you don't belong here," her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "And you'll show them you belong wherever you walk in." The automatic doors opened, a gust of chilled air and the scent of polished wood swept out. Sarah lifted her chin and stepped inside. Every eye in the lobby seemed to pause on her, not because she stood out, but because she didn't fit in. And then Evan appeared. No greeting, no smile, just a slight nod before he turned and walked toward the elevator. Sarah followed, silent. Evan's office was on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the city and a desk so massive one couldn't tell if it was meant for work or to showcase dominance. When Evan glanced at his watch, Sarah entered, setting her bag down. "You're 2 minutes late." Sarah raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms. "Really? And you're a few years late learning how to say, thank you." The corner of Evan's mouth twitched. not quite a smile, more like he weighed her boldness. "You still have a chance to walk away," he said evenly. Sarah answered without hesitation. "There's nothing worth walking away from." That's when the glass door slid open. A woman walked in. Gray blazer, hair tied neatly back, tablet in hand, eyes sharp as a blade. Nora Winters, Evan's right hand, and the woman who had quietly taken Daniel the night before. Now there was no baseball cap, no sweet voice, only that cold stare. "Ms. Carter," Nora nodded. "Welcome to Holt Dynamics." Sarah gave a faint smile, unblinking. "Oh, full titles now. Fine. Nice to see you again, Ms. Winters." A slight flicker in Nora's eyes, small enough that no one else would have noticed. But Sarah noticed. She always noticed the things others tried to hide. Nora handed the tablet to Evan, giving Sarah one more look, as if silently asking, "How long can she last here?" Evan didn't look up. "I'll brief her myself." Nora paused, then nodded. "Good luck." Sarah narrowed her eyes. That sounded more like a warning than a wish. Nora left, leaving the two alone in a room flooded with light and tension. Evan placed the tablet on the desk and pushed it toward Sarah. "Orion Corporation. They want to move manufacturing to Asia. Cut costs. That means thousands of jobs lost." Sarah flipped through the file, her eyes skimming the numbers. "And what do you want me to do? Smile until they change their minds?" "No," Evan answered immediately. "I need you to do what they won't expect. Make them fear losing what they can't buy." Sarah looked up, eyes sharp as razors. "And what's that?" Evan leaned back in his chair, his gaze unflinching. "Someone like you." In that moment, Sarah realized she wasn't just stepping into their world. She'd been chosen to be the one who could shake it. The meeting room on the 47th floor was cold, proud, designed like a gleaming battlefield. A long walnut table stretching like a ribbon of power, glass walls overlooking a haze-shrouded skyline. Each chair was placed with precision, not an inch off. Sarah stepped inside and sat next to Evan. Across from them were three men in tailored high-end suits, representatives of the Orion Corporation. They didn't look at her. They didn't need to. To them, Sarah was just the one who came along, a secretary, an assistant, or someone given a seat out of charity. Evan didn't introduce her. He started the meeting as if Sarah had always been part of this game. "You want to move the manufacturing line to Taiwan," Evan stated flatly. "It saves you 15% in the first 2 years, but lays off over 3,000 of our employees in Texas. I want to hear how that's considered strategic." Philip Langford, Orion's lead, around 60, silver hair slicked back, eyes cold as ice, smiled mockingly. "Raymond." "No, Evan. You're smarter than this. This is economics, not charity. We're not doing anything unethical. We're just unemotional." Sarah smirked faintly, a thin, quiet smile. "Sounds like calling a hurricane an increased rainfall event, even after it's drowned an entire town." For the first time, the three men turned to look at her. Philip frowned. "You are?" Sarah didn't wait for a second ask. "Sarah Carter, Holt Dynamics, External Strategy." She placed a file on the table and pulled out the pages, each one a chart, an analysis, numbers wrapped in ice and fire. "If you move the factory, you'll cut costs. True. But by year 3, when local wages increase by 11% and logistics costs rise 8%, your net profits drop by 22%. That's not even counting the domestic protests, media backlash, and the partner companies that exist solely on community trust." Langford squinted. "You think a few numbers will change the direction of an entire corporation?" Sarah leaned forward, her gaze sharp as a blade. "No. I think a few numbers will change the way your shareholders see profits. And if you don't alter the plan, I think those numbers will go straight to CNBC by tonight." No one said a word, only the sound of paper turning, and the breathing of men who had begun to worry. Evan didn't interrupt her, didn't support her, but in his eyes, for the first time, there was something that looked like pride. Langford placed the documents back down, his jaw tightening. "We'll reconsider the proposal." "Do that," Sarah replied, her voice low but sharper than any warning. Evan tilted his head toward her as the boardroom doors closed behind them. "I knew I chose the right person." Sarah gave a half smile, looking away. "And I knew I just made a whole room listen to something they've never heard from someone like me." Just a few weeks after forcing the Orion board to reconsider their proposal, Sarah began to feel a strange undercurrent in the halls of Holt Dynamics. Morning greetings grew shorter. Emails suddenly forgot to include her in threads. Small meetings took place behind her back, where sidelong glances and lingering stares followed her every step. Sarah knew these signs too well. In this world, a black woman who was too competent, too direct, was always seen as a threat. Then, one afternoon, Nora, Evan's assistant, appeared at Sarah's office door. Her face was tense, and she had a printed email in her hand. "We have a problem," Nora said bluntly. Sarah took the sheet, her eyes scanning the lines. It was a confidential financial report, classified as internal distribution only, and had been leaked. The email it was sent from: Sarah Carter. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "What the hell is this?" Sarah stepped back, voice dropping low. "We know it wasn't you," Nora said firmly, "but the board might not see it that way." Sarah gripped the paper tightly, her chest rising and falling. "Who's seen this?" "Evan, and the entire board." It felt like the whole world had coiled into a single rope, and someone was pulling it tight around her neck. Sarah stormed into Evan's office like a whirlwind. She didn't knock. There was no room for decorum in a storm. He was waiting, hands clasped, those pale gray eyes looking straight through her, as if trying to dissect every thought. "Tell me right now," Sarah said, voice choked. "Do you think I did this?" Evan didn't answer immediately. He was silent for several seconds, long enough for her heart to pound like war drums. Finally, he said, "I don't think so, but the board might." Sarah clenched her fists. "So what? They want to fire me, make me the scapegoat to kill the scandal." Evan stood and slipped on his blazer, never breaking eye contact. "I won't let that happen. We're going to find out who's behind it." Sarah froze. "We?" Evan nodded. "I didn't hire you to sacrifice you." The fury inside Sarah began to cool, not because of what he said, but because of how he looked at her, as an equal, not a failed investment. But she knew, from this moment forward, this wasn't just about reputation. This was war. "Then," Sarah exhaled sharply, "where do we start?" The hunt began that very night. Sarah and Nora sat across from each other in the data room. Pale blue light from the monitors reflected off their faces, and each woman focused intently on her laptop. Gone were the pencil skirts and high heels. Only two women remained, once wary of one another, now fighting on the same side. The leaked email was sent from a virtual server, but I doubt he expected us to dig into the code line by line, Nora murmured, eyes locked on her screen. "I grew up in the projects of West Baltimore," Sarah replied. "Trust me, if I wanted to survive, I had to learn to track people like a detective by the time I was in school." Around 2 a.m., they found it, a secondary IP address, poorly encrypted, linked to a shadow account in the internal system, e.calloway@holtdynamics.com. Sarah jerked her head up. Calloway. Eric Calloway, Senior Executive Vice President, the man who ignored her during that first meeting, the one who called her a decorative token for diversity. He is known for always keeping his hands clean while letting others do his dirty work. "He knew this was the fastest way to eliminate me," Sarah said, her voice like ice. And if we had no proof, I'd be gone before sunrise. But this time, she had proof. When the board called an emergency meeting the next morning, they assumed Sarah would arrive on the defensive, maybe even begging. Instead, she entered like a storm. Their head was high, their blazer sharp, and a thick file folder in her hand. Evan was already seated at the head of the table, his eyes heavy, with silent intensity. "I know why I'm here," Sarah began, voice steady and firm. "But I think you all should know why you're here too." She placed the folder on the table, traced emails, server access logs, bank records, and phone transcripts with reporters. All of it pointed to Calloway. A dead silence spread across the room. Calloway's face turned pale. "You're making this up," he hissed. Sarah turned to Evan. "Do you think I'm making it up?" Evan stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Number. I think you just saved this company from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit." He turned to Calloway. "Effective immediately. You're fired. Legal will be in touch. And if you think this will be buried, remember, the press already has a copy of this file." No one said another word. Sarah stood there. No shouting, no gloating, just a calm black woman who had exposed a system that once tried to crush her. For the first time in that boardroom, power had shifted. 2 weeks later, at the high school graduation ceremony of a prestigious private school in Baltimore, Sarah stood beside Evan, watching Daniel, the same boy who once shivered in the rain under a diner awning, roll across the stage to receive his diploma. Daniel wore a gray suit, his hair neatly combed, and his smile was wide, as if every wound from the past had finally healed. He raised his hand and waved at them, his eyes glowing with hope. "Told you," Daniel shouted as he rolled back toward them. "I promised I'd graduate with honors." Sarah laughed and reached out to ruffle his hair like she always did. "I never doubted it, not for a second." Evan stood beside her, more reserved but with a rare softness in his eyes. "You did well, Sarah," he said, "not just at the company, but with Daniel too." Sarah tilted her head and smiled gently. "I didn't raise him, but I know how to see a child who just needs to be believed in." Daniel glanced back and forth between them. "So, are you two going to hug it out, or just stand there being all deep and emotional all day?" Evan raised an eyebrow. "Absolutely not." Sarah chuckled. "Not a chance." The three of them burst out laughing in the middle of the schoolyard. No more invisible walls, no more class divide, no more past holding them back from who they could be. Sarah was no longer the waitress standing in the rain that night. She was a woman who had walked into a system of power and forced it to change with kindness, courage, and unyielding resolve. And Daniel, he was living proof that when someone is truly seen, really deeply seen, they rise far beyond anyone's expectations. Years later, Sarah Carter was no longer associated with a rainy night on Lexington Avenue. It now appeared on the grand signage outside a high-rise office building. Vice President of Strategy, Holt Dynamics. No more grease-stained aprons or uniforms smelling of fryer oil, but a sharp blazer and confident strides through glass corridors, where the very men who once dismissed her now bowed their heads in greeting. Under Sarah's leadership, Holt Dynamics transformed. Prioritized minority-owned businesses in its supply chain, expanded free vocational training programs for youth in underprivileged neighborhoods. The Sarah Evan Foundation focuses on supporting children from disadvantaged backgrounds. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the foundation's first community center, Daniel, now a sophomore majoring in social technology, stood beside Sarah, both holding scissors to cut the red ribbon. He addressed the crowd with the same smile he'd worn that night, after a warm sandwich. "I used to think the world wasn't made for someone like me. But then, one woman showed me. Sometimes, all it takes is a dry towel and a hot bowl of soup to make the world different. Sarah couldn't hide her emotion. In that moment, she knew. All the sleepless nights, the near firings, the contemptuous looks, they had all led to this. When a reporter asked, "What kept you from breaking down in a place like Holt Dynamics?" Sarah answered, "Because I once stood in the cold rain, and I know what it feels like to need someone to open the door." From a sandwich, from an unseen act of kindness, she had planted a seed, and now it had grown into a forest. If you believe in the power of kindness, never stop sharing it, because you never know who's waiting for you to open the door in the rain.